turn off the lights and let me feel you. I don't wanna think about myself right now. Stay out all night because I want to. Wake up in the morning and I'm hollowed out. I drew the outline on the paper, now I'm running out of space. Family at the dinner table, but I don't have a place. Where will we go? Why am I afraid to be alone? Sinking in petals, looking for the bottom. Where will we go? Cried on the phone again, I'm sorry. You don't need to think about me breaking down. Looking for guidance, but there's no advice to give, 'cause I'm the only one who can figure it out. Where will we go? Why am I afraid to be alone? Sinking in petals, looking for the bottom. Where will we go?
All right, I think this is working. Shut up, phone. Okay, we will ignore the phone. So hello everyone, happy Friday. Wanagi, hi. It's good to see you here, and thank you for the follow. You're only as trapped as you are risk averse, I know. And if it was just me, I would be a lot braver, but I'm still going to take care of my mom. And I can't just tell her, sorry, we're just going to starve now because I've decided to quit my job. So, but yeah, I mean, honestly, I've worked for the same company for 10 years and I now make less than $1 over minimum wage. So, nah, not into it anymore. So yeah, I'm gonna try to do some voice acting. I don't know about commission readings. I have no idea how to go about any of that. But you're not here to listen to me complain. You are here to listen to me read. And I hope you like our nice new. Your account of 10 years is gone? Oh no. Oh no. Well, we have to make you a mod again. Where did I put my keyboard? Hold on. Did you anger the Twitch gods, Wanagi? Okay, you should be a mod again. Okay, now we'll put the keyboard back on the floor. I am not the most organized streamer yet, but I'm working on it. Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone thinks Twitch support is great. And I'm sorry you lost your old account, though. That really does suck. Bad Twitch. I appreciate it if you come across anything that you think I would be a fit for. Because I'm always up to doing some reading or some voice acting. And I mean, ideally, I want to get a GoPro and do some field work with Rocket Sage, but we will see. For now, I am doing my little job from home and cursing them a lot. But, it is what it is. It's a paycheck. You lost your ability to log on with two-factor. Why would they... Twitch is stupid. Twitch is stupid. Because I don't have the same phone that I had before. I'm an idiot and I have been sitting here talking and I forgot to unmute the microphone again. That's what happens when I try to use my phone as a remote control. IR Pro streamer. So anyway, as I was saying, that sucks that Twitch did that to you. Because there's just no excuse for that. There's no excuse and I will not stand for it. And yeah, if you ever reattempt Channel X, I am there with you. I will gladly do anything I can to help you with that. So is the audio levels okay? Can you guys hear me? Can you hear the sounds? Do I need to turn me down? Turn the background sounds up? They can't verify you're the owner even though your verified email you have. That is so... You hear no background? Okay, let me turn, because you should hear... But every now and then, because I'm having to trick OBS and not let it update, or else it won't run on my computer, because it doesn't like Windows 7. So let me make sure that it isn't set to monitor only, because every now and then it reverts to monitor only. Oh, okay. You got it? Alright. Thank you, Wanagi. Okay. Now we will begin our reading. And hopefully soon maybe I will get some new emotes, because I am wanting some. So who knows what the next stream will be. Maybe we'll have cute emotes. Anyway, on to what you came here for, which is reading. I can read, I swear to God. Alright. Chapter 3. The Urake. Pippin lay in a dark and troubled dream. It seemed that he could hear his own small voice echoing in black tunnels, calling, "Frodo, Frodo." But instead of Frodo, hundreds of hideous orc faces grinned at him out of the shadows. Hundreds of hideous arms grasped at him from every side. Where was Merry? He woke. Cold air blew on his face. He was lying on his back. Evening was coming, and the sky above was growing dim. He turned and found that the dream was little worse than the waking. His wrists, legs, and ankles were tied with cords. Beside him Merry lay, white-faced, with a dirty rag bound across his brows. All about them sat or stood a great company of orcs. Well, I mean, at the rate I'm going at it, it's going to be a long read, yeah. I've gotten through the first third, and it's only taken me, 2 years? So, yeah, it's going to be a long read. Longer than most with me doing it. But that's okay. Slowly, in Pippin's aching head, memory pieced itself together and became separated from dream shadows. Of course! He and Merry had run off into the woods. What had come over them? Why had they dashed off like that, taking no notice of old Strider? They had run a long way shouting. He could not remember how far or how long. And then suddenly they had crashed right into a group of orcs. They were standing listening, and they did not appear to see Merry and Pippin until they were almost in their arms. Then they yelled, and dozens of other goblins had sprung out of the trees. Merry and he had drawn their swords, but the orcs did not wish to fight, and had tried only to lay hold of them, even when Merry had cut off several of their arms and hands. Good old Merry. Then Boromir had come leaping through the trees. He had made them fight. He slew many of them, and the rest fled. But they had not gone far on the way back when they were attacked again. By 100 orcs at least, some of them very large, and they shot a rain of arrows, always at Boromir. Boromir had blown his great horn till the woods rang, and at first the orcs had been dismayed and had drawn back. But when no answer but the echoes came, they had attacked more fiercely than ever. Pippin did not remember much more. His last memory was of Boromir leaning against a tree, plucking out an arrow. Then darkness fell suddenly. I suppose I was knocked on the head, he said to himself. I wonder if poor Merry is much hurt. What has happened to Boromir? Why didn't the orcs kill us? Where are we, and where are we going? He could not answer the questions. He felt cold and sick. I wish Gandalf had never persuaded Elrond to let us come, he thought. What good have I been? Just a nuisance, a passenger, a piece of luggage. And now I have been stolen, and I'm just a piece of luggage for the orcs. I hope Strider or someone will come and claim us. But ought I to hope for it? Won't that throw out all the plans? I wish I could get free. He struggled a little, quite uselessly. One of the orcs sitting near laughed and said something to a companion in their abominable language. "Rest while you can, little fool," he then said to Pippin in the common speech, which he made almost as hideous as his own language. "Rest while you can. We'll find a use for your legs before long. You'll wish you had got none before we get home." "If I had my way, you'd wish you were dead now," said the other. "I'd make you squeak, you miserable rat." He stooped over Pippin, bringing his yellow fangs close to his face. He had a black knife with a long, jagged blade in his hand. "Lie quiet, or I'll tickle you with this," he hissed. "Don't draw attention to yourself, or I may forget my orders. Curse the Isengarders." He passed into a long, angry speech in his own tongue that slowly died away into muttering and snarling. Terrified, Pippin lay still, though the pain at his wrists and ankles was growing, and the stones beneath him were boring into his back. To take his mind off himself, he listened intently to all that he could hear. There were many voices round about, and though orc speech sounded at all times full of hate and anger, it seemed plain that something like a quarrel had begun and was getting hotter. To Pippin's surprise, he found that much of the talk was intelligible. Many of the orcs were using ordinary language. Apparently the members of 2 or 3 quite different tribes were present, and they could not understand one another's orc speech. There was angry debate concerning what they were to do now, which way they were to take, and what should be done with the prisoners. "There's no time to kill them properly," said one. "No time for play on this trip." "That can't be helped," said another. "But why not kill them quick? Kill them now. They're a cursed nuisance. And we're in a hurry. Evening's coming on, and we ought to get a move on." "Orders," said a third in a deep growl. "Kill all but not the halflings. They are to be brought back alive as quickly as possible. That's my orders." "What are they wanted for?" asked several voices. "Why alive? Do they give good sport?" "No. I heard that one of them has got something that's wanted for the war, some elvish plot or other. Anyway, they'll both be questioned." "Is that all you know? Why don't we search them and find out? We might find something that we could use ourselves." "That is a very interesting remark," sneered a voice, softer than the others, but more evil. "I may have to report that. The prisoners are not to be searched or plundered. Those are my orders." "And mine too," said the deep voice. "Alive and as captured, no spoiling. That's my orders." "Not our orders," said one of the earlier voices. "We have come all the way from the mines to kill and avenge our folk. I wish to kill and then go back north." "Then you can wish again," said the growling voice. "I am Ugluk. I command. I return to Isengard by the shortest road." "Is Sauron the master of the Great Eye?" said the evil voice. "We should go back at once to Lugbers." "If we could cross the great river, we might," said another voice, "but there are not enough of us to venture down to the bridges." "I came across," said the evil voice. "A winged Nazgul awaits us northward on the east bank." Maybe. Then you'll fly off with our prisoners and get all the pay and praise in Lugbers, and leave us to foot it as best as we can through the horse country. No, we must stick together. These lands are dangerous, full of foul rebels and brigands." "Aye, we must stick together," ground Ugluk. "I don't trust you, little swine. You've no guts outside your own sties. But for us, you'd all have run away. We are the fighting Uruk-hai. We slew the great warrior. We took the prisoners. We are the servants of Saruman the Wise, the White Hand, the hand that gives us man's flesh to eat. We came out of Isengard and led you here, and we shall lead you back by the way we choose. I am Ugluk. I have spoken." "You have spoken more than enough, Ugluk," sneered the evil voice. "I wonder how they would like it in Lugbers. They might think that Ugluk's shoulders need relieving of a swollen head. They might ask where his strange ideas came from. Did they come from Saruman, perhaps? Who does he think he is, sitting on his own with his filthy white badges? I might agree with Grishnak, their trusted messenger, and I, Grishnak, say this. Saruman is a fool, and a dirty, treacherous fool, but the great eye is on him. Swine, is it? How do you folk like being called swine by the muckrakers of a dirty little wizard? It's orc flesh they eat, I'll warrant. Many loud yells in orc speech answered him, and the ringing clash of weapons being drawn. Cautiously Pippin rolled over, hoping to see what would happen. His guards had gone to join in the fray. In the twilight he saw a large black orc, probably Uglok, standing facing Grishnak, a short, crooked-legged creature, very broad and with long arms that hung almost to the ground. Round them were many smaller goblins. Pippin supposed that they were the ones from the north. They had drawn their knives and swords, but hesitated to attack Uglok. Uglok shouted, and a number of other orcs of nearly his own size ran up. Then suddenly, without warning, Uglok sprang forwards, and with 2 swift strokes swept the heads off 2 of his opponents. Grishnak stepped aside and vanished into the shadows. The others gave way, and one stepped backwards and fell over Mary's prostrate form with a curse. Yet that probably saved his life, for Uglok's followers leapt over him and cut down another with the broad-bladed sword. It was the yellow-fanged guard. His body fell right on top of Pippin, still clutching its long saw-edged knife. "Put up your weapons," shouted Uglok, "and let's have no more nonsense. We go straight west from here, and down the stair. From there, straight to the downs, then along the river to the forest, and we march day and night. That clear?" "Now," thought Pippin, "if only it takes that ugly fellow a little while to get his troop under control, I've got a chance." A gleam of hope had come to him. The edge of the black knife had snicked his arm and then slid down to his wrist. He felt the blood trickling onto his hand, but he also felt the cold touch of steel against his skin. The orcs were getting ready to march again, but some of the northerners were still unwilling, and the Isengarders slew 2 more before the rest were cowed. There was much cursing and confusion. For the moment Pippin was unwatched. His legs were securely bound, but his arms were only tied about the wrists, and his hands were in front of him. He could move them both together, though the bonds were cruelly tight. He pushed the dead orc to one side, then, hardly daring to breathe, he drew the knot of the wrist cord up and down against the blade of the knife. It was sharp, and the dead hand held it fast. The cord was cut. Quickly Pippin took it in his fingers and knotted it again against a loose bracelet of 2 loops and slipped it over his hands. Then he lay very still. "Pick up those prisoners," shouted Uglok. "Don't play any tricks with them. If they are not alive, when we get back, someone else will die too." An orc seized Pippin like a sack, put its head between his tied hands, grabbed his arms, and dragged them down until Pippin's face was crushed against its neck. Then it jolted off with him. Another treated Mary in the same way. The orc's claw-like hand gripped Pippin's arms like iron. The nails bit into him. He shut his eyes and slipped back into evil dreams. Suddenly he was thrown onto the stony floor again. It was early night, but the slim moon was already falling westward. They were on the edge of a cliff that seemed to look out over a sea of pale mist. There was a sound of water falling nearby. "The scouts have come back at last," said an orc close at hand. "Well, what did you discover?" growled the voice of Uglok. "Only a single horseman, and he made off westwards. All's clear now." "Now, I dare say. But how long? You fools. You should have shot him. He'll raise the alarm. The cursed horse breeders will hear us by morning. Now we'll have to leg it double quick." A shadow bent over Pippin. It was Uglok. "Sit up," said the orc. "My lads are tired of lugging you about. We have got to climb down, and you must use your legs. Be helpful now. No crying out, no trying to escape. We have ways of paying for tricks that you won't like, though they won't spoil your usefulness for the master. He cut the thongs round Pippin's legs and ankles, picked him up by his hair, and stood him on his feet. Pippin fell down, and Ooglik dragged him by his hair again. Several orcs laughed. Ooglik thrust a flask between his teeth and poured some burning liquid down his throat. He felt a hot, fierce glow flow through him. The pain in his legs and ankles vanished. He could stand. Now for the other, said Ooglik. Pippin saw him go to Merry, who was lying close by, and kick him. Merry groaned. Seizing him roughly, Ooglik pulled him into a sitting position and tore the bandage off his head. Then he smeared the wound with some dark stuff out of a small wooden box. Merry cried out and struggled wildly. The orcs clapped and hooted. Can't take his medicine, they jeered. Doesn't know what's good for him. Aye, we shall have some fun later. But at the moment Ooglik was not engaged in sport. He needed speed and had to humor unwilling followers. He had healed Merry in orc fashion, and his treatment worked swiftly. When he had forced a drink from his flask down the hobbit's throat, cut his leg bonds, and dragged him to his feet, Merry stood up, looking pale but grim and defiant, and very much alive. The gash in his forehead gave him no more trouble, but he bore a brown scar to the end of his days. "Hello, Pippin," he said. "So you've come on this little expedition, too. Where do we get bed and breakfast?" "Now then," said Ooglik, "none of that. Hold your tongues. No talk to one another. Any trouble will be reported at the other end, and he'll know how to pay you. You'll get bed and breakfast all right, more than you can stomach." The orc band began to descend a narrow ravine leading down into the misty plain below. Merry and Pippin, separated by a dozen orcs or more, climbed down with them. At the bottom they stepped onto grass, and the hearts of the hobbits rose. "Now straight on," shouted Ooglik, "west and a little north. Follow Lugdush." "But what are we going to do at sunrise?" said some of the northerners. "Go on running," said Ooglik. "What do you think? Sit on the grass and wait for the whiteskins to join the picnic?" "But we can't run in the sunlight." "You'll run with me behind you," said Ooglik. "Run, or you'll never see your beloved holes again. By the white hand, what's the use of sending out mountain maggots on a trip, only half-trained? Run, curse you! Run while night lasts." Then the whole company began to run with the long loping strides of orcs. They kept no order, thrusting, jostling, and cursing, yet their speed was very great. Each hobbit had a guard of 3. Pippin was far back in the line. He wondered how long he would be able to go at this pace. He had had no food since the morning. One of his guards had a whip, but at present the orc liquor was still hot in him. His wits, too, were wide awake. Every now and again there came into his mind unbidden a vision of the keen face of Strider bending over a dark trail and running behind. But what could even a ranger see except a confused trail of orc feet? His own little prince and Merry's were overwhelmed by the trampling of the iron-shod shoes before them and behind them and about them. They had gone only a mile or so from the cliff when the land sloped down into a wide, shallow depression, where the ground was soft and wet. Mist lay there, pale glimmering in the last rays of the sickle moon. The dark shapes of the orcs in front grew dim, and then were swallowed up. "Aye, steady now," shouted Ooglik from the rear. A sudden thought leapt into Pippin's mind, and he acted on it at once. He swerved aside to the right, and dived out of reach of his clutching guard, head first into the mist. He landed sprawling on the grass. "Halt!" yelled Ooglik. There was for a moment turmoil and confusion. Pippin sprang up and ran, but the orcs were after him. Some suddenly loomed up right in front of him. "No hope of escape," thought Pippin, "but there is hope that I have left some of my own marks unspoilt on the wet ground." He groped with his 2 tied hands at his throat and unclasped the brooch of his cloak. Just as long arms and hard claws seized him, he let it fall. There I suppose it will lie until the end of time, he thought. I don't know why I did it. If the others have escaped, they're probably all gone with Frodo. A whip thong curled round his legs, and he stifled a cry. Enough, shouted Ooglook, running up. He's still got to run a long way yet. Make 'em both run. Just use the whip as a reminder. But that's not all, he snarled, turning to Pippin. I shan't forget. Payment is only put off. Leg it. Neither Pippin nor Merry remembered much of the later part of the journey. Evil dreams and evil waking were blended into a long tunnel of misery, with hope growing ever fainter behind. They ran and they ran, striving to keep up the pace set by the orcs, licked every now and again with a cruel thong cunningly handled. If they halted or stumbled, they were seized and dragged for some distance. The warmth of the orc draught had gone. Pippin felt cold and sick again. Suddenly he fell face downward on the turf. Hard hands with rending nails gripped and lifted him. He was carried like a sack once more, and darkness grew about him. Whether the darkness of another night or a blindness of his eyes, he could not tell. Dimly he became aware of voices clamoring. It seemed that many of the orcs were demanding a halt. Ooglook was shouting. He felt himself flung to the ground, and he lay as he fell till black dreams took him. But he did not long escape from pain. Soon the iron grip of merciless hands was on him. For a long time he was tossed and shaken, and then slowly the darkness gave way, and he came back to the waking world. Orders were shouted, and he was thrown roughly on the grass. There he lay for a while, fighting with despair. His head swam, but from the heat in his body he guessed that he had been given another draught. An orc stooped over him and flung him some bread and a strip of raw, dried flesh. He ate the stale gray bread hungrily, but not the meat. He was famished, but not yet so famished as to eat flesh flung to him by an orc, the flesh of he dared not guess what creature. He sat up and looked about. Merry was not far away. They were by the banks of a swift, narrow river. Ahead, mountains loomed. A tall peak was catching the first rays of the sun. A dark smudge of forest lay on the lower slopes before them. There was much shouting and debating among the orcs. A quarrel seemed on the point of breaking out again between the Northerners and the Isengarders. Some were pointing back away south, and some were pointing eastward. Very well, said Ooglock. Leave them to me, then. No killing, as I've told you before. But if you want to throw away what we've come all the way to go, throw it away. I'll look after it. Let the fighting Uruk-hai do the work, as usual. If you're afraid of the white-skins, run. Run. There's the forest. He shouted, pointing ahead. Get to it. It's your best hope. Off you go. And quick, before I knock a few more heads off, to put some sense into the others. There was some cursing and scuffling, and then most of the Northerners broke away and dashed off, over 100 of them, running wildly along the river towards the mountains. The hobbits were left with the Isengarders, a grimdark band, 80 at least, of large, swart, slant-eyed orcs, with great bows and short, broad-bladed swords. A few of the larger and bolder Northerners remained with them. Now we'll deal with Rishnok, said Ooglock, but some even of his own followers were looking uneasily southward. I know, growled Ooglock. The cursed horse boys have got wind of us. But that's all your fault, Snogga. You and the other scouts ought to have your ears cut off. But we are the fighters. We'll feast on horse flesh, yes, or something better. At that moment, Pippin saw why some of the troop had been pointing eastward. From that direction there now came hoarse cries, and there was Grishnak again, and at his back a couple of score of others like him, long-armed, crooked-legged orcs. They had a red eye painted on their shields. Uglik stepped forward to meet them. "So you've come back," he said. "Thought better of it, eh?" "I've returned to see that orders are carried out and the prisoners safe," answered Grishnach. "Indeed," said Uglik. "Waste of effort. I'll see that orders are carried out in my command. And what else did you come back for? You went in a hurry. Did you leave anything behind?" "I left a fool," snarled Grishnach. "But there were some stout fellows with him that are too good to lose." "I know you'd lead them into a mess. I've come to help them." "Splendid," laughed Uglik. "But unless you've got some guts for fighting, you've taken the wrong way. Lubers was your road. The Whiteskins are coming. What happened to your precious Nazgul? Has he had another mount shot under him? Now, if you'd brought him along, that might have been useful, if these Nazgul are all they make out." "Nazgul, Nazgul," said Grishnach, shivering and licking his lips, as if the word had a foul taste that he savored painfully. "You speak of what is deep beyond the reach of your muddy dreams, Uglik," he said. "Nazgul. Ah, all that they make out. One day you'll wish you had not said that, ape," he snarled fiercely. "You ought to know that they're the apple of the great eye. But the winged Nazgul, not yet, not yet. He won't let them show themselves across the great river yet, not too soon. They're for the war, and other purposes." "You seem to know a lot," said Uglik. "More than is good for you. I guess perhaps those in Lubers might wonder how and why. But in the meantime, the Uruk-hai of Isengard can do the dirty work as usual. Don't stand slavering there. Get your rabble together. The other swine are legging it to the forest. You better follow. You wouldn't get back to the great river alive. Right off the mark. Now, I'll be on your heels." The Isengarders seized Merry and Pippin again and slung them on their backs. Then the troops started off. Hour after hour they ran, pausing now and again only to sling the hobbits to fresh carriers, either because they were quicker and hardier, or because of some plan of Grishnach's. The Isengarders gradually passed through the orcs of Mordor, and Grishnach's folks closed in behind. Soon they were gaining also on the northerners ahead. The forest began to draw nearer. Pippin was bruised and torn. His aching head was grated by the filthy jowl and hairy ear of the orc that held him. Immediately in front were bowed backs and tough, thick legs going up and down, and resting, as if they were made of wire and horn, beating out the nightmare seconds of an endless time. In the afternoon, Uglik's troop overtook the northerners. They were flagging in the rays of the bright sun, winter sun shining in a pale, cool sky through it all. Their heads were down, and their tongues lolling out. "Maggots," jeered the Isengarders. "You're cooked. The Whiteskins will catch you and eat you. They're coming." A cry from Grishnach showed that this was not mere jest. Horsemen, riding very swiftly, had indeed been sighted, still far behind, but gaining on the orcs, gaining on them like a tide over the flats on folks straying in a quicksand. The Isengarders began to run with a redoubled pace that astonished Pippin, a terrific spurt, it seemed, for the end of a race. Then he saw that the sun was sinking, falling behind the misty mountains. Shadows reached over the land. The soldiers of Mordor lifted their heads and also began to put on speed. The forest was dark and close. Already they had passed a few outlying trees. The land was beginning to slope upwards, ever more steeply, but the orcs did not halt. Both Uglik and Grishnach shouted, spurred them on to a last effort. "They will make it yet. They will escape," thought Pippin, and then he managed to twist his neck, so as to glance back with one eye over his shoulder. He saw that riders away eastward were already level with the orcs, galloping over the plain. The sunset gilded their spears and helmets, and glinted in their pale flowing hair. They were hemming the orcs in, preventing them from scattering, and driving them along the line of the river. He wondered very much what kind of folks they were. He wished now that he had learned more in Rivendell, and looked more at maps and things. But in those days the plans for the journey seemed to be more competent, from Strider and even from Frodo. All that he could remember about Rohan was that Gandalf's horse, Shadowfax, had come from that land. That sounded hopeful as far as it went. But how will they know that we are not orcs, he thought. I don't suppose they've ever heard of hobbits down here. I suppose I ought to be glad that the beastly orcs look like being destroyed, but I would rather be saved myself. The chances that he and Merry would be killed together with their captors before ever the men of Rohan were aware of them. A few of the riders appeared to be bowmen, skilled at shooting from a running horse. Riding swiftly into range, they shot arrows at the orcs that straggled behind, and several of them fell. Then the riders wheeled away out of the range of the answering bows of their enemies, who shot wildly, not daring to halt. This happened many times, and on one occasion arrows fell among the Isengarders. One of them, just in front of Pippin, stumbled and did not get up again. Night came down without the riders closing in for battle. Many orcs had fallen, but fully 200 remained. In the early darkness, the orcs came to a hillock. The eaves of the forest were very near, probably no more than 3 furlongs away, but they could go no further. The horsemen had encircled them. A small band disobeyed Ugluk's command and ran on towards the forest. Only 3 returned. Well, here we are, sneered Grishnak. Fine leadership. I hope the great Ugluk will lead us out again. Put those halflings down, ordered Ugluk, taking no notice of Grishnak. You, Lugdush, get 2 others and stand guard over them. They're not to be killed unless the filthy white skins break through. Understand? As long as I'm alive, I want 'em. But they're not to cry out, and they're not to be rescued. Bind their legs. The last part of the order was carried out mercilessly, but Pippin found that for the first time he was close to Merry. The orcs were making a great deal of noise, shouting and clashing their weapons, and the hobbits managed to whisper together for a while. I don't think much of this, said Merry. I feel nearly done in. Don't think I could crawl away far, even if I was free. Lembas, whispered Pippin. Lembas, I've got some. Have you? I don't think they've taken anything but our swords. Yes, I had a packet, answered Merry, but it must be battered to crumbs. Anyway, I can't put my mouth in my pocket. You won't have to. But just then a savage kick warned Pippin that the noise had died down and the guards were watchful. The night was cold and still. All round the knoll on which the orcs were gathered, little watchfires sprang up, golden red in the darkness, a complete ring of them. They were within a long bow shot, but the riders did not show themselves against the light, and the orcs wasted many arrows shooting at the fires until Ugluk stopped them. The riders made no sound. Later in the night, when the moon came out of the mist, then occasionally they could be seen, shadowy shapes that glinted now and again in the white light, as they moved in ceaseless patrol. They'll wait for the sun, curse them, growled one of the guards. Why don't we get together and and charge through? What's old Ugluk think he's doing, I should like to know. I dare say you would, snarled Ugluk, stepping up from behind. Meaning I don't think at all, eh? Curse you. You're as bad as the other rabble. The maggots and the apes of Lugburs. No good trying to charge with them. They just squeal and bolt, and there are more than enough of these filthy horseboys to mop up our lot on the flat. There's only one thing those maggots can do. They can see like gimlets in the dark. But these whiteskins have better night eyes than most men, from all I've heard, and don't forget their horses. They can see the night breeze, or so it's said. Still, there's one thing the fine fellows don't know. Mauher and his lads are in the forest, and they should turn up any time now. Ugluk's words were enough, apparently, to satisfy the Isengarders, but the other orcs were both dispirited and rebellious. They posted a few watchers, but most of them lay on the ground, resting in the pleasant darkness. It did indeed become very dark again, for the moon passed westward into thick cloud, and Pippin could not see anything a few feet away. The fires brought no light to the hillock. The riders were not, however, content merely to wait for the dawn and let their enemies rest. A sudden outcry on the east side of the knoll showed that something was wrong. It seemed that some of the men had ridden in close, slipped off their horses, crawled to the edge of the camp and killed several orcs, and then had faded away again. Ugluk dashed off to stop a stampede. Pippin and Merry sat up. Their guards, Isengarders, had gone with Ugluk. But if the hobbits had any thought of escape, it was soon dashed. A long hairy arm took each of them by the neck and drew them close together. Dimly they were aware of Grishnak's great head and hideous face between them. His foul breath was on their cheeks. He began to paw them and feel them. Pippin shuddered as hard cold fingers groped down his back. "Well, my little ones," said Grishnak in a soft whisper. "Enjoying your nice rest, or not? A little awkwardly placed, perhaps. Swords and whips on one side and nasty spears on the other. Little people should not meddle in affairs that are too big for them." His fingers continued to grope. There was a light like a pale but hot fire behind his eyes. The thought came suddenly into Pippin's mind as if caught direct from the urgent thought of his enemy. Krishnuk knows about the ring. He's looking for it while Ugluk is busy. He probably wants it for himself. Cold fear was in Pippin's heart, yet at the same time he was wondering what use he could make of Grishnak's desire. "I don't think you'll find it that way," he whispered. "It isn't easy to find." "Find it?" said Grishnak. His fingers stopped crawling and gripped Pippin's shoulder. "Find what? What are you talking about, little one?" For a moment Pippin was silent. Then suddenly in the darkness he made a noise in his throat. "Gollum, Gollum." "Nothing, my precious," he added. The hobbits felt Grishnak's fingers twitch. "Oh," hissed the goblin, well, softly. "That's what he means, is it? Oh, very, very dangerous, my little ones." "Perhaps," said Merry, now alert and aware of Pippin's guess. "Perhaps, and not only for us. Still, you know your own business best. Do you want it or not? And what would you give for it?" "Do I want it? Do I want it?" said Grishnak, as if puzzled, but his arms were trembling. "What would I give for it? What do you mean?" "We mean," said Pippin, choosing his words carefully, "that it's no good groping in the dark. We could save you time and trouble, but you must untie your legs first, or we'll do nothing and say nothing." "My dear tender little fools," hissed Grishnak, "everything you have and everything you know will be got out of you in due time. Everything. You'll wish there was more that you could tell to satisfy the questioner. Indeed you will, quite soon. We shan't hurry the inquiry. Oh dear, no. What do you think you've been kept alive for? My dear little fellows, please believe me when I say that it was not out of kindness. That's not even one of Ugluk's faults." "I find it quite easy to believe," said Merry. "But you haven't got your prey home yet, and it isn't going to be going your way, whatever happens. If we come to Isengard, it won't be the great Grishnach that benefits. Saruman will take all that he can find. If you want anything for yourself, now's the time to do a deal. Grishnach began to lose his temper. The name of Saruman seemed especially to enrage him. Time was passing and the disturbance was dying down. Ugluk or the Isengarders might return at any moment. "Have you got it, either of you?" he snarled. "Golem, Golem," said Pippin. "Untie our legs," said Merry. They felt the orc's arms trembling violently. "Curse you, you filthy little vermin," he hissed. "Untie your legs. I'll untie every string in your bodies. Do you think I can't search you to the bones? Search you? I'll cut you both to quivering shreds. I don't need the help of your legs to get you away and have you all to myself." Suddenly he seized them. The strength in his long arms and shoulders was terrifying. He tucked them one under each armpit and crushed them fiercely to his sides. A great stifling hand was clapped over each of their mouths. Then he sprang forward, stooped low. Quickly and silently he went until he came to the edge of a knoll. There, choosing a gap between the watchers, he passed like an evil shadow out into the night. Down the slope and away westward towards the river that flowed out of the forest. In that direction there was a wide open space with only one fire. After going a dozen yards, he halted, peering and listening. Nothing could be seen or heard. He crept slowly on, bent almost double. Then he squatted and listened again. Then he stood up as if to risk a sudden dash. At that very moment, the dark form of a rider loomed up right in front of him. A horse snorted and reared. A man called out. Grishnach flung himself on the ground flat, dragging the hobbits under him. Then he drew his sword. No doubt he meant to kill his captives rather than allow them to escape or be rescued, but it was his undoing. The sword rang faintly and glinted a little in the light of the fire away to his left. An arrow came whistling out of the gloom. It was aimed with skill, or guided by fate, and it pierced his right hand. He dropped the sword and shrieked. There was a quick beat of hoofs, and even Grishnach leapt up and ran. He was hidden down, and a spear passed through him. He gave a hideous shivering cry, and remained still. The hobbits remained flat on the ground, as Grishnach had left them. Another horseman came riding swiftly to his comrade's aid. Whether because of some special keenness of sight, or because of some other sense, the horse lifted and sprang lightly over them, but its rider did not see them. Lying covered in their elven cloaks, too crushed for the moment, and too afraid to move. At last Mary stirred and whispered softly, "So far so good. But how are we to avoid getting spitted?" The answer came almost immediately. The cries of Grishnach had roused the orcs. From the yells and screeches that came from the knoll, the hobbits guessed that their disappearance had been discovered. Ugluk was probably knocking off a few more heads. Then suddenly the answering cries of orc voices came from the right, outside the circle of watchfires, from the direction of the forest and the mountains. Mauher had apparently arrived and was attacking the besiegers. There was the sound of galloping horses. The riders were drawing in their ring close round the knoll, risking the orc arrows so as to prevent any sortie, while a company rode off to deal with the newcomers. Suddenly Merry and Pippin realized that without moving they were now outside the circle. There was nothing between them and escape. "Now," said Merry, "if only we had our legs and hands free, we might get away. But I can't touch the knots, and I can't bite them." "No need to try," said Pippin. "I was going to tell you I've managed to free my hands. These loops are only left for show. You better have a bit of lembas first." He slipped the cords off his wrist and fished out a packet. The cakes were broken, but good, still in their leaf wrappings. The hobbits each ate 2 or 3 pieces. The taste brought back to them the memory of fair faces and laughter, and wholesome food in quiet days now far away. For a while they ate thoughtfully, sitting in the dark, heedless of the cries and wounds of battle nearby. Pippin was the first to come back to the present. "We must be off," he said. Half a moment. Grishnuk's sword was lying close at hand, but it was too heavy and clumsy for him to use, so he crawled forward, and finding the body of the goblin, he drew from its sheath a long, sharp knife. With this he quickly cut their bonds. "Now for it," he said. "When we've warmed up a bit, perhaps we shall be able to stand again and walk, but in any case we had better start crawling." They crawled. The turf was deep and yielding, and that helped them, but it seemed a long, slow business. They gave the watchfire a wide berth and wormed their way forward bit by bit until they came to the edge of the river, gurgling away in the black shadows under its steep banks. Then they looked back. The sounds had died away. Evidently Mauher and his lads had been killed or driven off. The riders had returned to their silent, ominous vigil. It would not last very much longer. Already the night was old. In the east, which had remained unclouded, the sky was beginning to grow pale. "We must get under cover," said Pippin, "or we shall be seen. It will not be any comfort to us if these riders discover that we are not orcs after we are dead." He got up and stamped his feet. "These cords have cut me like wires, but my feet are warm again. I could stagger on now. What about you, Mary?" Mary got up. "Yes," he said, "I can manage it. Limbus does put heart into you. A more wholesome sort of feeling, too, than the heat of that orc draught. I wonder what it was made of. Better not to know, I expect. Now let's get a drink of water to wash away the thought of it." "Not here. The banks are too steep," said Pippin. "Forward now." They turned and walked side by side slowly along the line of the river. Behind them the light grew in the east. As they walked, they compared notes, talking lightly in hobbit fashion of the things that had happened since their capture. No listener would have guessed from their words that they had suffered cruelly and been in dire peril, going without hope towards torment of death, or that even now, as they knew well, they had little chance of ever finding friend or safety again. "You seem to have been doing well, Master Took," said Mary. "You will get almost a chapter in old Bilbo's book, if ever I get a chance to report to him. Good work, especially guessing that hairy villain's little game and playing up to him. But I wonder if anyone will ever pick up your trail and find that brooch. I should hate to lose mine, but I am afraid yours is gone for good." "I shall have to brush up on my toes, if I am to get level with you. Indeed, Cousin Brandybuck is going in front now. This is where he comes in. I don't suppose you have much notion where we are, but I spent my time in Rivendell, but rather better. We are walking west along the Entwash. The butt end of the Misty Mountains is in front, and Fangorn Forest." Even as he spoke, the dark edge of the forest loomed up straight before them. Night seemed to have taken refuge under its great trees, creeping away from the coming dawn. "Lead on, Master Brandybuck," said Pippin. "Or lead back. We have been warned against Fangorn, but one so knowing will not have forgotten that." "I have not," answered Mary, "but the forest seems better to me, all the same, than turning back into the middle of a battle." He led the way in under the huge branches of the trees. Old beyond guessing, they seemed. Great trailing beards of lichen hung from them, blowing and swaying in the breeze. Out of the shadows the hobbits peeped, gazing back down the slope. Little furtive figures that in the dim light looked like elf children in the deeps of time, peering out of the wild wood in wonder at their first dawn. Far over the great river and the brown lands, leagues upon grey leagues away, the dawn came, red as flame. Loud rang the hunting horns to greet it. The riders of Rohan sprang suddenly to life. Horn answered horn again. Merry and Pippin heard, clear in the cold air, the neighing of war horses and the sudden singing of many men. The sun's limb was lifted, an arc of fire above the margin of the world. Then with a great cry the riders charged from the east. The red light gleamed on mail and spear. The orcs yelled and shot all the arrows that remained to them. The hobbits saw several horsemen fall, but their line held on up the hill and over it, and wheeled round and charged again. Most of the riders that were left alive then broke and fled, this way and that, pursued one by one to the death. But one band, holding together in a black wedge, drove forward resolutely in the direction of the forest. Straight up the slope they charged towards the watchers. Now they were drawing near, and it seemed certain that they would escape. They had already hewn down 3 riders that barred their way. "We have watched too long," said Merry. "There's Ugluk. I don't want to meet him again." The hobbits turned and fled deep into the shadows of the wood. So it was that they did not see the last stand, when Ugluk was overtaken and brought to bay at the very edge of Fangorn. There he was slain at last by Eomer, the 3rd Marshal of the Mark, who dismounted and fought him sword to sword. And over the wild fields the keen-eyed riders hunted down the few orcs that had escaped and still had strength to fly. Then when they had laid their fallen comrades in a mound and had sung their praises, the riders made a great fire and scattered the ashes of their enemies. So ended the raid, and no news of it came ever back either to Mordor or to Isengard, but the smoke of the burning rose high to heaven and was seen by many watchful eyes. That is the end of chapter 3. I'm going to take a bit of a break. You all take a break. We must have our water and hydrate. Get up and stretch. And I will be back in 15-20 minutes, and we will begin chapter 4. See you soon. Thank you.
while it lasted. I thought that we were forever. I didn't know any better. Took a second chance, trusted you again. I feel shattered. Broken strings cause you play me like a violin. Shame on me for all your 7 deadly sins. Had it all but you craved attention. Drowning in your own reflection. Put me down just to see me get back up again. 6 feet under and you're ready to give all the pain. If I was your new addition, you make me part of your equation. Shattered from the past, wish you were my last. Shattered me to pieces like broken glass. Ooh, frozen looking at pictures that we took back in the summer. I thought that I would remember how we used to feel, but this isn't real. Now we're over. Take it all, there's nothing left here anyway. We used to talk, but now we don't know what to say. Now we're just 2 passing strangers. We tried, you lied, goodbye forever. Put me down just to see me get back up again. 6 feet under and you're ready to give all the pain. If I was your new addition, you make me part of your equation. Shattered from the past, wish you were my last. Shattered me to pieces like broken glass. The feeling I once knew when I was close to you, they're fading from my heart. Now that we're apart, the memories are still strong. Though you've been gone so long.
Okay, and we are finally back. Yay! We'll see how far we get on the next chapter. I will probably have to take a brief little break in a little bit, but then we will just be reading. So I hope that you all got your snacks, took a stretch. I remembered to unmute the microphone this time, so yay me. And we are on to chapter 4 of book 2, Treebeard. Meanwhile, the hobbits went with as much speed as the dark and tangled forest allowed, following the line of the running stream, westward and up towards the slopes of the mountains, deeper and deeper into Fangorn. Slowly their fear of the orcs died away, and their pace slackened. A queer, stifling feeling came over them, as if the air were too thin or too scanty for breathing. At last, Merry halted. "We can't go on like this," he panted. "I want some air." "Let's have a drink at any rate," said Pippin. "I'm parched." He clambered on to a great tree root that wound down into the stream, and stooping drew up some water in his cupped hands. It was clear and cold, and he took many draughts. Merry followed him. The water refreshed them and seemed to cheer their hearts. For a while they sat together on the brink of the stream, dabbling their sore feet and legs, and peering round at the trees that stood silently above them, rank upon rank, until they faded away into grey twilight in every direction. "I suppose you haven't lost us already," said Pippin, leaning back against a great tree trunk. "We can at least follow the course of this stream, the Entwash or whatever you call it, and get out again the way we came." "We could if our legs would do it," said Merry, "and if we could breathe properly." "Yes, it is all very dim and stuffy in here," said Pippin. "It reminds me somehow of the old room in the great place of the Tooks away back in the Smeals at Tuckborough, a huge place where the furniture has never been moved or changed for generations. They say the old Took lived in it year after year, while he and the room got older and shabbier together, and it has never been changed since he died a century ago. And old Gerontius was my great-great-grandfather. That puts it back a bit. But that is nothing to the old feeling of this wood. Look at all those weeping, trailing beards and whiskers of lichen, and most of the trees seem to be half covered with ragged, dry leaves that have never fallen. Untidy. I can't imagine what spring would look like here, if it ever comes. Still less a spring cleaning." "But the sun at any rate must peep in sometimes," said Merry. "It does not look or feel at all like the Bilbo's description of Mirkwood. That was all dark and black, and the home of dark, black things. This is just dim, and frightfully tree-ish. You can't imagine animals living here at all, or staying for long." "No, nor hobbits," said Pippin. "And I don't like the thought of trying to get through it either. Nothing to eat for 100 miles, I should guess. How are our supplies?" "Low," said Merry. "We ran off with nothing but a couple of spare packets of lembas, and left everything else behind." They looked at what remained of the elven cakes. Broken fragments for about 5 meager days, that was all. "And not a wrap or a blanket," said Merry. "We shall be cold tonight, whichever way we go." "Well, we'd better decide on the way now," said Pippin. "The morning must be getting on." Just then they became aware of a yellow light that had appeared, some way further on into the wood. Shafts of sunlight seemed suddenly to have pierced the forest roof. "Hullo," said Merry. "The sun must have run into a cloud while we've been under these trees, and now she has run out again, or else she has climbed high enough to look down through some opening. It isn't far. Let's go and investigate." They found it was further than they thought. The ground was rising steeply still, and it was becoming increasingly stony. The light grew broader as they went on, and soon they saw that there was a rock wall before them, the side of a hill or the abrupt end of some long route thrust out by the distant mountains. No trees grew on it, and the sun was falling full on its stony face. The twigs of the trees at its foot were stretched out stiff and still, as if reaching out to the warmth. Where all had looked so shabby and gray before, the wood now gleamed with rich browns, with the smooth black grays of bark like polished leather. The boles of the trees glowed with a soft green like young grass. Early spring, or a fleeting vision of it, was about them. Alright, I gotta go help Mom for a minute, so I will be back in just a couple of minutes. Alright, on with our story. In the face of the stony wall, there was something like a stair. Natural, perhaps, and made by the weathering and splitting of the rock, for it was rough and uneven. High up, almost level with the tops of forest trees, there was a shelf under a cliff. Nothing grew there but a few grasses and weeds at its edge, and one old stump of a tree with only 2 bent branches left. It looked almost like the figure of some gnarled old man standing there, blinking in the morning light. "Up we go," said Merrily joyfully. "Now for a breath of air and a sight of the land." They climbed and scrambled up the rock. If the stair had been made, it was bigger feet. If the stair had been made, it was for bigger feet and longer legs than theirs. They were too eager to be surprised at the remarkable way in which the cuts and scores of their captivity had healed and their vigor had returned. They came at length to the edge of the shelf almost at the feet of the old stump. Then they sprang up and turned round with their backs to the hill, breathing deep and looking out eastward. They saw that they had only come some 3 or 4 miles into the forest. The heads of the trees marched down the slopes towards the plain. There, near the fringe of the forest, tall spires of curling black smoke went up, wavering and floating towards them. "The wind's changing," said Mary. "It's turned east again. It feels cool up here." "Yes," said Pippin. "I'm afraid this is only a passing gleam, and it will all go gray again. What a pity. This shaggy old forest looked so different in the sunlight. I almost felt like I liked the place." "Almost felt like you liked the forest. That's good. That's uncommonly kind of you," said a strange voice. "Turn round and let me have a look at your faces. I almost feel that I dislike you both, but do not let us be hasty. Turn around." A large knob-knuckled hand was laid on each of their shoulders, and they were twisted round, gently but irresistibly. Then 2 great arms lifted them up. They found that they were looking at a most extraordinary face. It belonged to a large, man-like, almost troll-like figure, at least 14 feet high, very sturdy, with a tall head and hardly any neck. Whether it was clad in stuff like green or gray bark, or whether that was its hide, was difficult to say. At any rate, the arms, at a short distance from the trunk, were not wrinkled, but covered with a brown, smooth skin. The large feet had 7 toes each. The lower part of the long face was covered with a sweeping gray beard, bushy, almost twiggy at the roots, thin and mossy at the ends. But at the moment the hobbits noted little but the eyes. Those deep eyes were now surveying them, slow and solemn, but very penetrating. They were brown, shot with a green light. Often afterwards Pippin tried to describe his first impression of them. One felt as if there was an enormous well behind them, filled up with ages of memory and long, slow, steady thinking, but their surface was sparkling with the present, like sun shimmering on the outer leaves of a vast tree, or on the ripples of a very deep lake. I don't know, but it felt as if something that grew in the ground, asleep, you might say, or just feeling itself as something between root tip and leaf tip, between deep earth and sky, had suddenly waked up and was considering you with the same slow care that it had given to its own inside affairs for endless years. "Hum, murmured the voice, a deep voice, with a very deep woodwind instrument. "Very odd indeed. Do not be hasty, that is my motto. But if I had seen you before I heard your voices, I liked them. Nice little voices. They reminded me of something I cannot remember. If I had seen you before I heard you, I should have just trodden on you, taking you for little orcs, and found out my mistake afterwards. Very odd you are indeed. Root and twig, very odd." Pippin, though still amazed, no longer felt afraid. Under those eyes he felt a curious suspense, but not fear. "Please," he said, "who are you, and what are you?" A queer look came into the old eyes, a kind of weariness. The deep wells were covered over. Now, answered the voice. Well, I am an Ent, or that's what they call me. Yes, Ent is the word. The Ent I am, you might say, in your manner of speaking. Fangorn is my name, according to some. Treebeard others make it. Treebeard will do. An Ent? Said Mary. What's that? But what do you call yourself? What's your real name? Who now, replied Treebeard. Whew, now you would be telling. Not so hasty. And I am doing the asking. You are in my country. What are you, I wonder? I cannot place you. You do not seem to come in the old lists that I learned when I was young. But that was a long, long time ago, and they may have made new lists. Let me see, how did it go? Learn now the lore of living creatures. First name the four, the free people. Eldest of all, the elf children. Dwarf the delver, dark of his houses. Ent the earthborn, old as mountains. Man the mortal, master of horses. Beaver the builder, buck the leaper. Bear be hunter, boar the fighter. Hound is hungry, hare is fearful. Eagle is eerie, ox in pasture. Horn crowded, hawk is swifter. Swan the whitest, serpent coldest. How did it go? Room tum, room ti choom choom. It was a long list. But anyway, you do not seem to fit in anywhere. We always seem to have got left off the old lists and the old stories, said Mary. Yet we've been about for quite a long time. We're hobbits. Why not make a new line, said Pippin. Half-grown hobbits, the hole-dwellers. Put us in amongst the four, next to man, the big people, and you've got it. Not bad, said Treebeard. That would do. So you live in holes, eh? That sounds very right and proper. Who calls you hobbits, though? That does not sound elvish to me. Elves made all the old words. They began it. Nobody else calls us hobbits. We call ourselves that, said Pippin. Come now, not so hasty. You call yourselves hobbits? But you should not go telling just anybody. You'll be letting out your own right names if you're not careful. We aren't careful about that, said Mary. As a matter of fact, I'm a Brandybuck. Maryadoc Brandybuck, though most people call me Mary. And I'm a Took, Peregrine Took, but I'm generally called Pippin, or even Pip. But you are hasty folk, I see, said Treebeard. I am honored by your confidence, but you should not be too free all at once. There are Ents and Ents, you know. Or there are Ents and things that look like Ents, but ain't, as you might say. I'll call you Mary and Pippin, if you please. Nice names. For I am not going to tell you my name, not yet, at any rate. A queer, half-knowing, half-humorous look came with a green flicker into his eyes. For one thing, it would take a long while. My name is growing all the time, and I've lived a very long, long time, so my name is like a story. Real names tell you the story of the things they belong to in my language. In the old Entish, you might say. It is a lovely language, but it takes a very long time to say anything in it, because we do not say anything in it, unless it is worth taking a long time to say, and to listen to. But now, and the eyes became very bright and present, seeming to grow smaller and almost sharp. What is going on? What are you doing in it all? I can see and hear and smell and feel a great deal from this, ah la la rumba cambada linda barimi. Excuse me, that is a part of my name for it. I do not know what the word is in the outside languages. You know, the thing we are on, where I stand and look out on fine mornings, and think about the sun and the grass beyond, the wood and the horses and the clouds and the unfolding of the world. What is going on? What is Gandalf up to? And these Bururum. He made a deep grumbling noise like a discord on a great organ. These orcs and young Saruman down at Isengard. I like news, but not too quick now. There is quite a lot going on, said Mary, and even if we tried to be quick, he would take a long time to tell. But you told us not to be hasty. Ought we not to tell you anything so soon? Would you think it rude if we asked what you were going to do with us and which side you are on? And did you know Gandalf? Yes, I do know him. The only wizard that really cares about trees, said Treebeard. Do you know him? Yes, said Pippin sadly. We did. He was a great friend, and he was our guide. Then I can answer your other questions, said Treebeard. I am not going to do anything with you. Not if you mean by that do something to you without your leave. We might do some things together. I don't know about sides. I go my own way, but your way may go along with mine for a while. But you speak of Master Gandalf as if he was in a story that had come to an end. Yes, we do, said Pippin sadly. The story seems to be going on, but I'm afraid Gandalf has fallen out of it. Oh, come now, said Treebeard. Oh well. He paused, looking long at the hobbits. Well, I do not know what to say. Come now. If you would like to hear more now, said Mary, we will tell you, but it will take some time. Wouldn't you like to put us down? Couldn't we sit here together in the sun while it lasts? You must be getting tired of holding us up. Tired? No, I am not tired. I do not easily get tired. And I do not sit down. I am not very, bendable. But there, the sun is going in. Let us leave this. Did you say what you call it? Hill? Suggested Pippin. Shelf? Step? Suggested Mary. Treebeard repeated the words thoughtfully. Hill. Yes, that was it. But it is a hasty word for a thing that has stood here ever since this part of the world was shaped. Never mind, let us leave it and go. Where shall we go? Asked Mary. To my home, or one of my homes, answered Treebeard. Is it far? I do not know. You might call it far, perhaps. But what does that matter? Well, you see, we have lost all our belongings, said Mary. We have only a little food. Oh, you need not trouble about that, said Treebeard. I can give you a drink that will keep you green and growing for a long, long while. And if you decide to part company, I can set you down outside my country at any point you choose. Let us go. Holding the hobbits gently but firmly, one in the crook of each arm, Treebeard lifted up first one large foot and then the other, and moved them to the edge of the shelf. The root-like toes grasped the rocks. Then carefully and solemnly he stalked down from step to step and reached the floor of the forest. At once he set off with long, deliberate strides through the trees, deeper and deeper into the wood, never far from the stream, climbing steadily up towards the slopes of the mountains. Many of the trees seemed asleep, or as unaware of him as of any other creature that merely passed by, but some quivered, and some raised up their branches above his head as he approached. All the while, as he walked, he talked to himself in a long-running stream of musical sounds. The hobbits were silent for some time. They felt, oddly enough, safe and comfortable, and they had a great deal to think and wonder about. At last, Pippin ventured to speak again. Please, Treebeard, he said, could I ask you something? Why did Celeborn warn us against your forest? He told us not to risk getting entangled in it. Did he now? Rumbled Treebeard. And I might have said much the same if you had been going the other way. Do not risk getting entangled in the woods of Lorelindorman. That is what the elves used to call it, but now they make the name shorter. Lothlorien, they call it. Perhaps they are right. Maybe it is fading, not growing. Land of the Valley of Singing Gold, that was it, once upon a time. Now it is the Dream Flower. Oh well, but it is a queer place, and not for just anyone to venture in. I am surprised that you ever got out, but much more surprised that you ever got in. That has not happened to strangers for many a year. It is a queer land. And so is this. Folk have come to grief here. Aye, they have to grief. Laurelindorinium, Laurelindelium, Melanorelinium, Ornamelon. He hummed to himself. They are falling rather behind in the world in there, I guess, he said. Neither this country nor anything else outside the Golden Wood is what it was when Celeborn was young. Still, that is what they used to say. Things have changed, but it is still true in places. What do you mean? Said Pippin. What is true? The trees and the ants, said Treebeard. I do not understand all that goes on myself, so I cannot explain it to you. Some of us are still true ants, and lively enough in our fashion, but many are growing sleepy. Going tree-ish, as you might say. Most of the trees are just trees, of course, but many are half awake. Some are quite wide awake, and a few are, getting entish. That is going on all the time. Yes, Fangorn, don't be a hasty ant. Take your time. When that happens to a tree, you find that some have bad hearts. Nothing to do with their wood, I do not mean that. Why, I knew some good old willows down the Entwash, gone long ago, alas. They were quite hollow, indeed they were falling all to pieces, but as quiet and sweet-spoken as a young leaf. And then there are some trees in the valleys under the mountains, sound as a bell and bad right through. That sort of thing seems to spread. There used to be some very dangerous parts in this country. There are still some very black patches. Like the old forest way to the north, do you mean? Asked Mary. Aye, something like, but much worse. I do not doubt there is some shadow of the great darkness lying there still away north, and bad memories are handed down. But there are hollow dales in this land where the darkness has never been lifted, and the trees are older than I am. So we do what we can. We keep off strangers and the foolhardy, and we train and we teach, we walk and we weed. We are tree herds, we old ents. Few enough of us are left now. Sheep get like shepherd, and shepherds like sheep, it is said, but slowly, and neither have long in the world. It is quicker and closer with trees and ents, and they walk down the ages together. For ents are more like elves, less interested in themselves than men are, and better at getting inside other things. And yet again ents are more like men, more changeable than elves are, and quicker at taking the color of the outside, you might say. Or better than both, for they are steadier and keep their minds on things longer. Some of my kin look just like trees now, and need something great to rouse them, and they speak only in whispers. But some of my trees are limb-lithe, and many can talk to me. Elves began it, of course, waking trees up and teaching them to speak and learning their tree talk. They always wished to talk to everything, the old elves did. But then the great darkness came, and they passed away over the sea, or fled into far valleys and hid themselves, and made songs about days that would never come again. Never again. Aye, there was all one wood once upon a time, from here to the mountains of Loon, and this was just the east end. Those were the broad days. Time was when I could walk and sing all day and hear no more than the echo of my own voice in the hollow hills. The woods were like the woods of Lothlorien, only thicker, stronger, younger. And the smell of the air. I used to spend a week just breathing. Treebird fell silent, striding along and yet making hardly a sound with his great feet. Then he began to hum again and passed into a murmuring chant. Gradually the hobbits became aware that he was chanting to them. In the willow meads of Tessarion I walked in the spring, the sight and the smell of the spring in Nan Tessarion, and I said that was good. I wandered in summer in the elms woods of Osiriant, the light and the music in the summer of the 7 rivers of Osir, and I thought that was best. To the beaches of Neldoreth I came in the autumn, the gold and the red and the sighing of leaves in the autumn in Taverna Neldor. It was more than my desire. To the pine trees upon the highland of Dorthonion I climbed in the winter, the wind and the whiteness and the black branches of winter upon Orad Nathon. My voice went up and sang in the sky, and now all those lands lie under the wave. And I walk in Amborona, in Tormorona, in Aldalome, in my own land, in the country of Fangorn, where the roots are long, and the years lie thicker than the leaves, in Torah Mornalome. He ended and strode on silently, and in all the wood, as far as ear could reach, there was not a sound. The day waned, and dusk was twined about the boles of the trees. At last the hobbits saw, rising dimly before them, a steep, dark land. They had come to the feet of the mountains, and to the green roots of tall Methadras. Down the hillside the young Entwash, leaping from its springs high above, ran noisily from step to step to meet them. On the right of the stream there was a long slope, clad with grass, now gray in the twilight. No trees grew there, and it was open to the sky. Stars were shining already in lakes between shores of clouds. Treebeard strode up the slope, hardly slackening his pace. Suddenly before them the hobbits saw a wide opening. 2 great trees stood there, one on either side, like living gateposts, but there was no gate save their crossing and interwoven boughs. As the old Ent approached, the trees lifted up their branches, and all their leaves quivered and rustled, for they were evergreen trees, and their leaves were dark and polished and gleamed in the twilight. Beyond them was a wide level space, as though the floor of a great hall had been cut in the side of the hill. On either hand, the walls sloped upwards until they were 50 feet high or more, and along each wall stood an aisle of trees that also increased in height as they marched inwards. At the far end the rock wall was sheer, but at the bottom it had been hollowed back into a shallow bay with an arched roof. The only roof of the hall save the branches of the trees, which at the inner end overshadowed all the ground, leaving only a broad open path in the middle. A little stream escaped from the springs above, and leaving the main water, fell tinkling down the sheer face of the wall, pouring in silver drops, like a fine curtain in front of the arched bay. The water was gathered again into a stone basin in the floor between the trees, and thence it spilled and flowed away beside the open path, out to rejoin the Entwash in its journey through the forest. Here we are, said Treebeard, breaking his long silence. I have brought you about 70,000 Ent strides, but what that comes to in the measurement of your land I do not know. Anyhow, we are near the roots of the last mountain. Part of the name of this place might be Welling Hall, if it were turned into your language. I like it. We will stay here tonight. He set them down on the grass between the aisles of the trees, and they followed him towards the great arch. The hobbits now noticed that as he walked, his knees hardly bent, but his legs opened in a great stride. He planted his big toe, and they were indeed big and very broad, on the ground first, before any other part of his feet. For a moment Treebeard stood under the rain of the falling spring and took a deep breath. Then he laughed and passed inside. A great stone table stood there, but no chairs. At the back of the bay it was already quite dark. Treebeard lifted 2 great vessels and stood them on the table. They seemed to be filled with water, but he held his hands over them, and immediately they began to glow, one with a golden and the other with a rich green light, and the blending of the 2 lights lit the bay as if the sun of summer was shining through a roof of young leaves. Looking back, the hobbit saw that the trees in the court had also begun to glow, faintly at first, but steadily quickening, until every leaf was edged with light. Some green, some gold, some red as copper, while the tree trunks looked like pillars molded out of luminous stone. Well, now we can talk again, said Treebeard. You were thirsty, I expect. Perhaps also tired. Drink this." He went to the back of the bay, and then they saw several tall stone jars stood there with heavy lids. He removed one of the lids and dipped in a great ladle, and with it filled 3 bowls, 1 very large bowl and 2 smaller ones. "This is an ent house," he said, "and there are no seats, I fear. But you may sit on the table." Picking up the hobbits, he set them on the great stone slab, 6 feet above the ground, and there they sat, dangling their legs and drinking in sips. The drink was like water, indeed very like the taste of the draughts they had drunk from the Entwash near the borders of the forest, and yet there was some scent or savour in them that they could not describe. It was faint, but it reminded them of the smell of a distant wood borne from afar by a cool breeze at night. The effect of the draught began at the toes, and rose steadily through every limb, bringing refreshment and vigor as it coursed upwards right to the tips of the hair. Indeed, the hobbits felt that the hair on their heads was actually standing up, waving and curling and growing. As for Treebeard, he first laved his feet in the basin beyond the arch, and then he drained his bowl at one draught, one long, slow draught. The hobbits thought he would never stop. At last he set the bowl down again. "Ah," he sighed. Now we can talk easier. You can sit on the floor, and I will lie down. That will prevent this drink from rising to my head and sending me to sleep." On the right side of the bay, there was a great bed on low legs, not more than a couple of feet high, covered deep in dried grass and bracken. Treebeard lowered himself slowly onto this, with only the slightest sign of bending at his middle, until he lay at full length, and his arms behind his head, looking up at the ceiling, upon which lights were flickering like the play of leaves in the sunshine. Merry and Pippin sat beside him on pillows of grass. "Now tell me your tale, and do not hurry," said Treebeard. The hobbits began to tell him the story of their adventures ever since they left Hobbiton. They followed in a very clear order, for they interrupted one another continuously, and Treebeard often stopped the speaker and went back to some earlier point, or jumped forward asking questions about later events. They said nothing whatever about the ring, and did not tell him why they set out or where they were going, and he did not ask for any reason. He was immensely interested in everything. In the Black Riders, in Elrond and Rivendell, in the Old Forest and Tom Bombadil, in the mines of Moria, and in Lothlorien and Galadriel. He made them describe the Shire and its country over and over again. He said an odd thing at this point. "You never see any Ents round there, do you?" he asked. "Well, not Ents. Entwives, I should really say." "Entwives?" said Pippin. "Are they like you at all?" Yes, well, no. I do not really know now," said Treebeard thoughtfully. "But they would like your country, so I just wondered." Treebeard was, however, especially interested in everything that concerned Gandalf, and most interested of all in Saruman's doings. The hobbits regretted very much that they knew so little about them, only a rather vague report by Sam of what Gandalf had told the council. But they were clear at any rate that Ugluk and his troop came from Isengard and spoke of Saruman as their master. Said Treebeard, when at last their story had wound and wandered down to the battle of the orcs and the riders of Rohan. Well, that is a bundle of news, and no mistake. You have not told me all, so indeed, not by a long way. But I do not doubt that you are going as Gandalf would wish. There is something very big going on, that I can see, and what it is, maybe I shall learn in good time, or in bad time. By root and twig, but it is a strange business. Up sprout a little folk that are not in the old lists, and behold, the 9 forgotten riders reappear to hunt them, and Gandalf takes them on a great journey, and Galadriel harbors them in Caras Galadhorn, and orcs pursue them down all the leagues of Wilderland. Indeed, they seem to be caught up in a great storm. I hope they weather it. "And what about yourself?" asked Merry. I am not troubled about the great wars," said Treebeard. "Wizards are always troubled about the future. I do not like worrying about the future. I am not altogether on anybody's side, because nobody is altogether on my side, if you understand me. Nobody cares for the woods as I care for them, not even elves nowadays. Still, I take more kindly to elves than to others. It was the elves that cured us of dumbness long ago, and that was a great gift that cannot be forgotten, though our ways have parted since. And there are some things, of course, whose side I am altogether not on. I am against them altogether, these Barroom, Hegan made a deep rumble of disgust, these orcs and their masters. I used to be anxious when the shadow lay on Mirkwood, but when it removed to Mordor, I did not trouble for a while. Mordor is a long way away, but it seems that the wind is setting east, and the withering of all woods may be drawing near. There is naught that an old ant can do to hold back that storm. He must weather it or crack. But Saruman is a neighbor. I cannot overlook him. I must do something, I suppose. I have often wondered lately what I should do about Saruman. Who is Saruman? Asked Pippin. Do you know anything about his history? Saruman is a wizard, answered Treebeard. More than that I cannot say. I do not know the history of wizards. They appeared first after the great ships came over the sea, but if they came with the ships, I never can tell. Saruman was reckoned great among them, I believe. He gave up wandering about and minding the affairs of men and elves some time ago. You would call it a very long time ago, and he settled down at Angrenost, or Isengard, as the men of Rohan call it. He was very quiet to begin with, but his fame began to grow. He was chosen to be the head of the White Council, they say, but that did not turn out too well. I wonder even now if that Saruman was not turning to evil ways. But at any rate, he used to give no trouble to his neighbors. I used to talk to him. There was a time when he was always walking about my woods. He was polite in those days, always asking my leave, at least when he met me, and always eager to listen. I told him many things that he would never have found out by himself, but he never repaid me in like kind. I cannot remember that he ever told me anything, and he got more and more like that. His face, as I remember it, I have not seen it for many a day, became like windows in a stone wall, windows with shutters inside. I think that I now understand what he is up to. He is plotting to become a power. He has a mind of metal and wheels. He does not care for growing things, except as far as they serve him for the moment. And now it is clear that he is a black traitor. He is taken up with foul folk, with the orcs. Worse than that. He is doing something to them, something dangerous. For these Isengarders are more like wicked men. It is a mark of evil things that came in the great darkness that they cannot abide the sun. But Saruman's orcs can endure it, even if they hate it. I wonder what he has done. Are they men he has ruined? Or has he blended the races of orcs and men? That would be a black evil. Treebeard rumbled for a moment, as if he were pronouncing some deep, subterranean Entish malediction. Some time ago I began to wonder how orcs dared to pass through my woods so freely, he went on. Only lately did I guess that Saruman was to blame, and that long ago he had been spying out all the ways and discovering my secrets. He and his foul folk are making havoc now. Down on the borders they are felling trees. Good trees. Some of the trees they just cut down and leave to rot. Orc mischief, that. But some are hewn up and carried off to feed the fires of Orthnank. There is always a smoke rising from Isengard these days. Curse him root and branch. Many of those trees were my friends, creatures I had known from nut and acorn. Many had voices of their own that are lost forever now. And there are wastes of stump and bramble where once there were singing groves. I have been idle. I have let things slip. It must stop. Treebeard raised himself from his bed with a jerk, stood up, and thumped his hands on the table. The vessels of light trembled and sent up 2 jets of flame. There was a flicker like green fire in his eyes, and his beard stood out stiff as a great besom. "I will stop it," he boomed, "and you shall come with me. You may be able to help me. You will be helping your own friends that way too, for if Sauerman is not checked, Rohan and Gondor will have an enemy behind as well as in front. Our roads go together to Isengard." "We will come with you," said Merry. "We will do what we can." "Yes," said Pippin. "I should like to see the White Hand overthrown. I should like to be there, even if I could not be of much use. I shall never forget Ogluk and the crossing of Rohan." "Good, good," said Treebeard. But I spoke hastily. "We must not be hasty. I have become too hot. I must cool myself and think, for it is easier to shout stop than to do it." He strode to the archway and stood for some time under the falling rain of the spring. Then he laughed and shook himself, and wherever the drops of water fell, glittering from him to the ground, they glinted like red and green sparks. He came back and laid himself on the bed again, and was silent. After some time the hobbits heard him murmuring again. He seemed to be counting on his fingers. "Fangorn, Finglas, Fladrif, aye," he sighed. "The trouble is that there are so few of us left," he said, turning towards the hobbits. "Only 3 remain of the first Ents that walked in the woods before the darkness. Only myself, Fangorn, and Finglas, and Fladrif. To give them their elvish names, you may call them Leaflock and Skinbark, if you like that better. And of us 3, Leaflock and Skinbark are not much use for this business. Leaflock has grown sleepy, almost tree-ish, you might say. He has taken to standing by himself half asleep all through the summer with the deep grass of the meadow round his knees. Covered with leafy hair he is. He used to rouse up in the winter, but of late he has been too drowsy to walk far even then. Skinbark lived on the mountain slopes west of Isengard. That is where the worst trouble has been. He was wounded by the orcs, and many of his folk and his tree herds have been murdered and destroyed. He has gone up into the high places, among the birches that he loves best, and he will not come down. Still, I dare say I could get together a fair company of our younger folks, if I could make them understand the need, if I could rouse them. We are not a hasty folk. What a pity there are so few of us." "Why are there so few, when you have lived in this country so long?" asked Pippin. "Have a great many died?" "Oh no," said Treebeard. "None have died from inside, as you might say. Some have fallen in the evil chances of the long years, of course, and more have grown tree-ish. But there were never many of us, and we have not increased. There have been no entings, no children, you would say, for a terrible long count of years. You see, we lost the Entwives." "How very sad," said Pippin. "How was it that they all died?" "They did not die," said Treebeard. "I never said they died. We lost them, I said. We lost them, and we cannot find them." He sighed. "I thought most Entwives sung among elves and men from Mirkwood to Gondor. They cannot be quite forgotten." "Well, I'm afraid the songs have not come west over the mountains to the Shire," said Merry. "Won't you tell us some more, or sing us one of the songs?" "Yes, I will indeed," said Treebeard, seeming pleased with the request. "But I cannot tell it properly, only in short, and then we must end our talk. Tomorrow we have councils to call and work to do, and maybe a journey to begin." "It is a rather strange and sad story," he went on after a pause. "When the world was young, and the woods were wide and wild, the Ents and the Entwives, and there were Ent-maidens then, the loveliness of Fimbrethil, of Wandalim the light-footed in the days of our youth. They walked together and they housed together. But our hearts did not go on growing in the same way. The Ents gave their loves to things that they met in the world, And the Entwives gave their thought to other things, for the Ents loved the great trees and the wild woods and the slopes of the high hills, and they drank of the mountain streams and ate only such fruit as the trees that fall in their path. They learned of the elves and spoke with the trees. But the Entwives gave their minds to the lesser trees, and to the meads and the sunshine beyond the feet of the forests. And they saw the sloe in the thicket, and the wild apple and the cherry blossoming in spring, and the green herbs of the waterlands in summer, and the seeding grasses in the autumn fields. They did not desire to speak with these things, but they wished them to hear and obey what was said to them. The Entwives ordered them to grow according to their wishes and bear leaf and fruit to their liking, but the Entwives desired order and plenty and peace, by which they meant that things should remain where they had set them. So the Entwives made gardens to live in, but we Ents went on wandering, and we only came to the gardens now and again. Then, when the darkness came in the north, the Entwives crossed the great river and made new gardens and tilled new fields, and we saw them more seldom. After the darkness was overthrown, the land of the Entwives blossomed richly, and their fields were full of corn. Many men learned the crafts of the Entwives and honored them greatly, but we were only a legend to them, a secret in the heart of the forest. Yet here we still are, while all the gardens of the Entwives are wasted. Men call them the Brown Lands now. I remember it was long ago, in the time of the war between Sauron and the Men of the Sea. Desire came over me to see Fimbrethil again. Very fair she was still in my eyes when I had last seen her, though little like the Ent maiden of old. For the Entwives were bent and browned by their labor, their hair parched by the sun to the hue of ripe corn, and their cheeks like red apples. Yet their eyes were still the eyes of our own people. We crossed over Anduin and came to their land, but we found a desert. It was all burned and uprooted, for war had passed over it. But the Entwives were not there. Long we called, and long we searched, and we asked all folk that we met which way the Entwives had gone. Some said they had never seen them, and some said that they had been seen walking away west, and some said east, and others south. But nowhere that we went could we find them. Our sorrow was very great, yet the wildwood called, and we returned to it. For many years we used to go out every now and then again and look for the Entwives, walking far and wide and calling them by their beautiful names. But as time passed we went more seldom and wandered less far. And now the Entwives are only a memory for us, and our beards are long and grey. The elves made many songs concerning the search of the Ents, and some of the songs passed into the tongues of men. But we made no songs about it, being content to chant their beautiful names when we thought of the Entwives. We believe that we may meet again in a time to come, and perhaps we shall find somewhere a land where we can live together and both be content. But it is foreboded that will only be when we have both lost all that we now have, and it may well be that time is drawing near at last. For if Sauron of old destroyed the gardens, the enemy today seems likely to wither all the woods. There was an elvish song that spoke of this, or at least so I understand it. It used to be sung up and down the great river. It was never an Entish song, mark you. It would have been a very long song in Entish, but we know it by heart and hum it now and again. This is how it runs in your tongue. When spring unfolds the beechen leaf and sap is in the bough, when light is on the wild wood stream and wind is on the brow, when stride is long and breath is deep and keen the mountain air, come back to me, and say my land is fair. When spring is come to garth and field and corn is in the blade, when blossom like a shining snow is on the orchard laid, when shower and sun upon the earth with fragrance fill the air, I'll linger here and will not come, because my land is fair. When summer lies upon the world, and in a noon of gold, beneath the roof of sleeping leaves the dreams of trees unfold, when woodland halls are green and cool, and wind is in the west, come back to me, and say my land is best. When summer warms the hanging fruit and burns the berry brown, when straw is gold and ear is white and harvest comes to town, when honey spills and apple swells, the wind be in the west, I'll linger here beneath the sun because my land is best. When winter comes, the winter wild that hill and wood shall slay, when trees shall fall and starless night devour the sunless day, when wind is in the deadly east, then in the bitter rain I'll look for thee and call to thee, I'll come to thee again. When broken is the barren bow, and light and labor past, I'll look for thee and wait for thee until we meet again. Together we will take the road beneath the bitter rain, together we will take the road that leads into the west, and far away we'll find a land where both our hearts may rest. Treebird ended his song. That is how it goes, he said. It was elvish, of course, light-hearted and quick-worded and soon over. I dare say it is fair enough, but the Ents could say more on their side, if they had time. But now I am going to stand up and take a little sleep. Where will you stand? We usually lie down to sleep, said Mary. We shall be all right where we are. Lie down to sleep, said Treebeard. Why, of course you do. I was forgetting. Singing that song put me in mind of old times. Almost thought that I was talking to young Entings, I did. Well, you can lie on the bed. I'm going to stand in the rain. Good night. Merry and Pippin climbed on the bed and curled up in the soft grass and fern. It was fresh and sweet-scented and warm. The lights died down and the glow of the trees faded, but outside under the arch they could see old Treebeard standing, motionless, with his arms raised above his head. The bright stars peered out of the sky and lit the falling water as it spilled onto his fingers and head, and dripped in hundreds of silver drops to his feet. Listening to the tinkling of the drops, the hobbits fell asleep. They woke to find a cool sun shining in the great court and onto the floor of the bay. Shreds of high cloud were overhead, running on a stiff easterly wind. Treebeard was not to be seen, but while Merry and Pippin were bathing in the basin by the arch, they heard him humming and singing as he came up the path between the trees. Good morning, Merry and Pippin, he boomed when he saw them. You sleep long. I have been many 100 strides already today. Now we will have a drink and go to Entmoot. He poured them out 2 full bowls of water from a stone jar, but from a different jar. The taste was not the same as it had been the night before. It was earthier and richer, and more sustaining and food-like, so to speak. While the hobbits drank, sitting on the edge of the bed and nibbling small pieces of elf cake, more because they felt that eating was a necessary part of breakfast than because they felt hungry. Treebeard stood, humming in Entish or Elvish or some strange tongue, and looking up at the sky. "Where's Entmoot?" Piper ventured to ask. Entmoot?" said Treebeard, turning round. "It is not a place. It is a gathering of Ents, which does not happen often nowadays. But I have managed to make a fair number promise to come. We shall meet in the place where we have always met. Durndengelman call it. It is away south from here. You must be there before noon." Before long they set off. Treebeard carried the hobbits in his arms as the previous day. At the entrance to the court he strode to the right, stepped over the stream, and strode away southwards along the feet of great tumbled slopes where trees were scanty. Above these the hobbits saw thickets of birch and rowan, and beyond them dark, climbing pine woods. Soon Treebeard turned a little way from the hill and plunged into deep groves where the trees were larger, taller, and thicker than any that the hobbits had ever seen before. For a long while they felt faintly the sense of stifling which they had noticed when they first ventured into Fangorn, but it soon passed. Treebeard did not talk to them. He hummed to himself deeply and thoughtfully, but Merry and Pippin caught no proper words. It sounded like boom, boom, rum, boom, boorar, boom, boom, durar, boom, durar, boom, and so on, with a constant change of note and rhythm. Now and again they thought they heard an answer, a hum or a quiver of sound that seemed to come out of the earth, or from boughs above their heads, or perhaps from the boles of the trees, but Treebeard did not stop or turn his head to either side. They'd been going for a long while. Pippin had tried to keep count of the Ent strides, but had failed, getting lost at about 3,000, when Treebird began to slacken his pace. Suddenly he stopped, put the hobbits down, and raised his curled hands to his mouth so that they made a hollow tube. Then he blew or called through them. A great home rang out like a deep-throated horn in the woods, and seemed to echo from the trees. Far off there came from several directions a similar home. There was not an echo, but an answer. Treebeard now perched Merry and Pippin on his shoulders and strode on again, every now and then sending out another horn call, and each time the answer came louder and nearer. In this way they came at last to what looked like an impenetrable wall of dark evergreen trees of a kind that the hobbits had never seen before. They branched out right from the roots, and were densely clad in dark glossy leaves like thornless holly, and they bore many stiff upright flower spikes with large shining olive-colored buds. Turning to the left, and skirting this huge hedge, Treebeard came in a few strides to a narrow entrance. Through it a worn path passed and dived suddenly down a long, steep slope. The hobbits saw that they were descending into a great dingle, almost as round as a bowl, very wide and deep, crowned at the rim with a high, dark evergreen hedge. It was smooth and grass-clad inside, and there were no trees except 3 very tall and beautiful silver birches that stood at the bottom of the bowl. 2 other paths led down into the dingle, from the west and from the east. Several Ents had already arrived. More were coming in down the other paths, and some were now following Treebeard. As they drew near, the hobbits gazed at them. They had expected to see a number of creatures as much like Treebeard as one hobbit is like another, at any rate to a stranger's eyes, and they were very much surprised to see nothing of the kind. The Ents were as different from one another as trees from trees, some as different as one tree is from another of the same name but quite different growth and history, and some as different as one tree kind from another. A birch from a beech, oak from fir. There were a few older Ents, bearded and gnarled like hail, but ancient trees, though none looked as ancient as Treebeard. And there were tall, strong Ents, clean-limbed and smooth-skinned like forest trees in their prime, but there were no young Ents, no saplings. Altogether there were about 24 standing on the wide grassy floor of the dingle, and as many more were marching in. At first Merry and Pippin were struck chiefly by the variety that they saw, the many shapes and colors, the differences in girth and height, and length of leg and arm, and in the number of toes and fingers, anything from 3 to 9. A few seemed more or less related to Treebeard, and reminded them of beech trees or oaks. But there were other kinds. Some recalled the chestnut, brown-skinned Ents with large splay-fingered hands and short, thick legs. Some recalled the ash, tall, straight gray Ents with many-fingered hands and long legs. Some the fir, the tallest Ents, and others the birch, the rowan, and the linden. But when the Ents all gathered round Treebeard, bowed their heads slightly, murmuring in their slow, musical voices, and looking long and intently at the strangers, then the hobbits saw that they were all of the same kindred, and all had the same eyes, not all so old or so deep as Treebeard's, but all with the same slow, steady, thoughtful expression, and the same green flicker. As soon as the whole company was assembled, standing in a wide circle round Treebeard, a curious and unintelligible conversation began. The Ents began to murmur slowly. First one joined, and then another, until they were all chanting together in a long rising and falling rhythm, now louder on one side of the ring, now dying away and rising to a great boom on the other side of the ring. Though he could not catch or understand any of the words, he supposed the language was Entish. Pippin found the sound very pleasant to listen to at first, but gradually his attention wavered. After a long time, and the chant showed no sign of slackening, he found himself wondering, since Entish was such an unhasty language, whether they had yet got further than good morning, and if Treebeard was to call the roll, how many days it would take to sing all their names. I wonder what the Entish is for yes or no, he thought. He yawned. Treebeard was immediately aware of him. Hey, my Pippin, he said, and the other Ents all stopped their chant. You are a hasty folk, I was forgetting, and anyway it is wearisome listening to a speech you do not understand. You may get down now. I have told your names to the Entmoot, and they have seen you, and they have agreed that you are not orcs, and that a new line shall be put in the old lists. We have got no farther yet, but that is quick work for an Entmoot. You and Mary can stroll about the dingle if you like. There is a well of good water if you need refreshing, away yonder in the north bank. There are still some words to speak before the moot really begins. I will come and see you again and tell you how things are going. He put the hobbits down. Before they walked away, they bowed low. This feat seemed to amuse the Ents very much, to judge by the tone of their murmurs and the flicker of their eyes, but they soon turned back to their own business. Merry and Pippin climbed up the path that came in from the west and looked through the opening in the great hedge. Long tree-clad slopes rose from the lip of the dingle, and away beyond them, above the fir trees of the furthest ridge, there rose, sharp and white, the peak of a high mountain. Southwards to their left, they could see the forest falling away into the great distance. There, far away, there was a pale green glimmer that Mary guessed to be a glimpse of the plains of Rohan. I wonder where Isengard is, said Pippin. I don't know quite where we are, said Mary. But that peak is probably Methedras, and as far as I can remember, the ring of Isengard lies in a fork or deep cleft at the end of the mountains. It is probably down behind this great ridge. There seems to be a smoke or haze over there, left of the peak, don't you think? What is Isengard like? Said Pippin. I wonder what Ents can do about it anyway. So do I, said Mary. Isengard is a sort of ring of rocks or trees, I think. Of rocks or hills, I think, with a flat space inside and an island or pillar of rock in the middle, called Orthanc. Saruman has a tower on it. There is a gate, perhaps more than one, in the encircling wall, and I believe there is a stream running through it. It comes out of the mountains and flows on across the gap of Rowan. It does not seem the sort of place for Ents to tackle. But I have an odd feeling about these Ents. Somehow I don't think they are quite as safe and, well, funny as they seem. They seem slow, queer, and patient, almost sad. And yet I believe they could be roused. If that happened, I would rather not be on the other side. Yes, said Pippin, I know what you mean. There might be all the difference between an old cow sitting and thoughtfully chewing and a bull charging, and the change might come suddenly. I wonder if Treebeard will rouse them. I'm sure he means to try. But they don't like being roused. Treebeard got roused himself last night and then bottled it up again. The hobbits turned back. The voices of the Ents were still rising and falling in their conclave. The sun had now risen high enough to look over the high hedge. It gleamed on the tops of the birches and lit the northward side of the dingle with a cool yellow light. There they saw a little glittering fountain. They walked along the rim of the great bowl at the feet of the evergreens. It was pleasant to feel cool grass about their toes again and not be in a hurry. And then they climbed down to the gushing water. They drank a little, a clean, cold, sharp draught, and sat down on a mossy stone, watching the patches of sun on the grass and the shadows of the sailing clouds passing over the floor of the dingle. The murmur of the Ents went on. It seemed a very strange and remote place outside their world, and far from everything that had ever happened to them. A great longing came over them for the faces and voices of their companions, especially for Frodo and Sam, and for Strider. At last there came a pause in the Ent voices, and looking up they saw Treebeard coming towards them, with another Ent at his side. Here I am again, said Treebeard. Are we getting weary or feeling impatient, eh? Well, I am afraid that you must not get impatient yet. We have finished the first stage now. but I've still got to explain things again to those that live a long way off, far from Isengard, and those that I could not get round to before the moot, and after that we shall have to decide what to do. However, deciding what to do does not take Ents so long as going over all the facts and events that they have to make up their minds about. Still, it is no use denying we shall be here a long time yet, a couple of days very likely. So I brought you a companion. He has an Ent house nearby. Bregalad is his elvish name. He says he has already made up his mind and does not need to remain at the moot. He is the nearest thing among us to a hasty Ent. You ought to get on together. Goodbye. Treebeard turned and left them. Bregalad stood for some time surveying the hobbits solemnly, and they looked at him and wondered when he would show any signs of hastiness. He was tall and seemed to be one of the younger Ents. He had smooth, shining skin on his arms and legs. His lips were ruddy, and his hair was gray-green. He could bend and sway like a slender tree in the wind. At last he spoke, and his voice, though resonant, was higher and clearer than Treebeard's. My friends, let us go for a walk, he said. I am Bregalad, that is, Quickbeam in your language, but it is only a nickname, of course. They have called me that since I said yes to an elder Ent before he had finished his question. Also, I drink quickly and go out while some are still wetting their beards. Come with me. He reached down two shapely arms and gave a long-fingered hand to each of the hobbits. All that day they walked about in the woods with him, singing and laughing, for Quickbeam often laughed. He laughed if the sun came out from behind a cloud. He laughed if they came upon a stream or spring. Then he stooped and splashed his feet and head with water. He laughed sometimes at some sound or whisper in the trees. Whenever he saw a rowan tree, he halted a while with his arms stretched out, and sang and swayed as he sang. At nightfall he brought them to his Ent house, nothing more than a mossy stone set upon turfs under a green bank. Rowan trees grew in a circle about it, and there was water, as in all Ent houses, a spring bubbling out from the bank. They talked for a while as darkness fell on the forest. Not far away the voices of the Entmoot could be heard still going on, but now they seemed deeper and less leisurely, and every now and again one great voice would rise in a high and quickening music, while all the others died away. But beside them Bregalad spoke gently in their own language, almost whispering, and they learned that he belonged to Skinbark's people, and the country where they had lived had been ravaged. That seemed to the hobbits quite enough to explain his hastiness, at least in the matter of orcs. There were rowan trees in my home, said Bregalad, softly and sadly. Rowan trees that took root when I was an Enting many, many years ago in the quiet of the world. The oldest were planted by the Ents to try and please the Entwives, but they looked at them and smiled and said that they knew where whiter blossoms and richer fruit were growing. Yet there are no trees of all that race, the people of the rose, that are so beautiful to me. And these trees grew and grew till the shadow of each was like a green hall, and the red berries in the autumn were a burden and a beauty and a wonder. Birds used to flock there. I like birds, even when they chatter, and the rowan has enough and to spare. But the birds became unfriendly and greedy and tore at the trees, and threw the fruit down and did not eat it. Then orcs came with axes and cut down my trees. I came and called them by their long names, but they did not quiver. They did not hear or answer. They lay dead. The hobbits fell asleep to the sound of the soft singing of Bregalad, that seemed to lament in many tongues the fall of trees that he had loved. The next day they spent also in his company, but they did not go far from his house. Most of the time they sat silent under the shelter of the bank, for the wind was colder and the clouds closer and grayer. There was little sunshine, and in the distance the voices of the Ents and at the moot still rose and fell, sometimes loud and strong, sometimes low and sad, sometimes quickening, sometimes slow and solemn as a dirge. A second night came, and still the Ents held conclave under hurrying clouds and fitful stars. The third day broke, bleak and windy. At sunrise, the Ents' voices rose to a great clamor, and then died down again. As the morning wore on, the wind fell, and the air grew heavy with expectancy. The hobbits could see that Bregalad was now listening intently, although to them, down in the dell of his Ent house, the sound of the moot was faint. The afternoon came, and the sun, going westwards towards the mountains, sent out long yellow beams between the cracks and fissures of the clouds. Suddenly they were aware that everything was very quiet. The whole forest stood in listening silence. Of course, the Ent voices had stopped. What did that mean? Bregalad was standing up erect and tense, looking back northwards towards Sturndingle. Then with a crash came a great ringing shout. Rahum Ra! The trees quivered and bent as if a gust had struck them. There was another pause, and then a marching music began like solemn voices, like the solemn drums, and above the rolling beats and booms there welled voices, singing high and strong. We come with the roll of the drum. Tarun darun darun daram. The Ents were coming. Ever nearer and louder rose their song. We come with horn and drum. Taruna runa runa rom. Bregalad picked up the hobbits and strode from his house. Before long they saw the marching line approaching. The Ents were swinging along with great strides down the slope towards them. Treebeard was at their head, and some 50 followers were behind him, 2 abreast, keeping step with their feet and beating time with their hands upon their flanks. And they drew near the flash and flicker of their eyes could be seen. Whom, here we come with a boom, here we come at last, called Treebeard when he caught sight of Bregalad and the hobbits. Come, join the moot. We are off to Isengard. To Isengard, the Ents cried in many voices. To Isengard. To Isengard, though Isengard be ringed and barred with doors of stone, though Isengard be strong and hard, as cold as stone and bare as bone, we go to war, to hew the stone and break the door. For bowl and bough are burning now, the furnace roars, we go to war. To land of gloom with tramp of doom, with roll of drum we come. To Isengard with doom we come, with doom we come, with doom we come. So they sang as they marched southwards. Bregalad, his eyes shining, swung into the line beside Treebeard. The old Ent now took the hobbits back and set them on his shoulders again, and so they rode proudly at the head of the singing company with beating hearts and heads held high. Though they had expected something to happen eventually, they were amazed at the change that had come over the Ents. It seemed now as sudden as the bursting of a flood that had long been held back by a dike. The Ents made up their minds rather quickly after all, didn't they? Pippin ventured to say after some time, when for a moment the singing paused, and only the beating of hands and feet was heard. Quickly? Said Treebeard. Yes, indeed, quicker than I expected. Indeed, I have not seen them roused like this for many an age. We Ents do not like being roused, and we never are roused unless it is clear to us that our trees and our lives are in great danger. That has not happened in this forest since the wars of Sauron and the Men of the Sea. It is the orc work, the wanton hewing, rarum, without even the bad excuse of feeding the fires that has so angered us, and the treachery of a neighbor who should have helped us. Wizards ought to know better. They do know better. There is no curse in Elvish, Entish, or the tongues of men bad enough for such treachery. Down with Sauron. Will you really break the doors of Isengard? Asked Mary. Well, we could, you know. You do not know, perhaps, how strong we are. Maybe you have heard of trolls? They are mighty strong. But trolls are only counterfeits, made by the enemy in the great darkness, in mockery of Ents, as orcs were of elves. We are stronger than trolls. We are made of the bones of the earth. We can split stone like the roots of trees, only quicker, far quicker, if our minds are roused. If we are not hewn down or destroyed by fire or a blast of sorcery, we can split Isengard into splinters and crack its walls into rubble. But Sauron will try to stop you, won't he? Yes, that is so. I have not forgotten it. Indeed, I have thought long about it. But you see, many of the ants are younger than I am, by many lives of trees. They are all roused now, and their mind is all on one thing, breaking Isengard. But they will start thinking again before long. They will cool down a little when we take our evening drink. What a thirst we shall have. But let them march now and sing. We have a long way to go, and there is time ahead for thought. It is something to have started. Treebeard marched on, singing with the others for a while. But after a time his voice dimmed to a murmur and fell silent again. Pippin could see that his old brow was wrinkled and knotted. At last he looked up, and Pippin could see a sad look in his eyes. Sad, but not unhappy. There was a light in them, as if the green flame had sunk deeper into the dark wells of his thought. Of course, it is likely enough, my friends, he said slowly. Likely enough that we are going to our doom. The last march of the ants. But if we stayed at home and did nothing, doom would find us anyway, sooner or later. The thought has long been growing in our hearts, and that is why we are marching now. It was not a hasty resolve. Now at least the last march of the ants may be worth a song. Aye, he sighed, we may help the other people before we pass away. Still, I should have liked to see the songs come true about the Entwives. I should dearly have liked to see Fimbrethil again. But there, my friends, songs like trees bear fruit only in their own time and their own way, and sometimes they are withered untimely. The ants were striding on at a great pace. They had descended into a long fold of the land that fell away southward. Now they began to climb up and up onto the high western ridge. The woods fell away, and they came to scattering groups of birch, and then to bare slopes where only a few gaunt pine trees grew. The sun sank behind the dark hillback in front. Grey dusk fell. Pippin looked behind. The number of the ants had grown. Or what was happening? Where the dim bare slopes that they had crossed should lie, he thought he saw groves of trees. But they were moving. Could it be that the trees of Fangorn were awake, and the forest was rising, marching over the hills to war? He rubbed his eyes, wondering if sleep and shadow had deceived him, but the great grey shapes moved steadily onward. There was a noise like wind in many branches. The ants were drawing near the crest of the ridge now, and all song had ceased. Night fell, and there was silence. Nothing was to be heard save a faint quiver of the earth beneath the feet of the ants, and a rustle, the shade of a whisper, of as many drifting leaves. At last they stood upon the summit, and looked down into a dark pit, the great cleft at the end of the mountains. Nan Curunir, the valley of Saruman. Night lies over Isengard, said Treebeard. And that is the end of that chapter, and I think that is where I'm going to end the stream for tonight before I fall asleep. Thank you all for coming, and I hope that I get more regular with the streaming. Jeez. No, I'm not going to be screaming. With the streaming. It is a great story. The ants make me sad. Poor ants. Hey, you. I'm glad that she made it back. I'm still sad that she lost her other account, which should have helped you. I'm going to try to stream again tomorrow. My plan is to stream every Friday and every Saturday. And who knows, maybe by 2024 I will get through this book. 42 years working with the USGS. That is amazing. That is awesome. So we're only a month late in wishing you a happy 42nd anniversary. That's really cool. And my goal is to one day do geology stuff again. But that is a ways off. But for now, I just read stories about sad trees. So thank you all for joining me on this Friday night or Saturday morning, depending on where you are. Yeah, Mount St. Helens in 1980. I knew a man who was bicycling through, I want to say Oregon, when Mount St. Helens erupted. I know where I live now, people have talked about the ash from Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens is pretty fascinating. I've been following thing about the glacier that's forming and making its way down. I like reading. I'm glad that you like them. I don't know what I'm going to read next after I finish this book. But like I said, I figure I have until 2025 to worry about finding another book to read at this point. I bet it was a heck of a Sunday. I mean, at least hopefully if it happened again, there would not be the same loss of life. Because we have gotten better, and technology has gotten better. Okay, book is somewhere else. There's still one more to read. One more what to read? Oh, there's one more. There's still more chapters of book 2 of The Lord of the Rings. Then there's book 3 of The Lord of the Rings. And then I will have to... I guess I could read The Hobbit. I read The Hobbit in elementary school. I don't want to read it again. Though The Hobbit is a shorter book at least. I mean, there's always going to be books to read, right? Yeah. I have to read The Hobbit now after I read The Lord of the Rings. I did this to myself. I will hopefully see you all tomorrow, or at least see some of you. Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine losing someone like that. Losing a coworker, a friend. But as long as he is remembered, he is still with us. That's the way I look at it. As long as we remember the people that we have lost, we still have them. Why has my mouse stopped working? No. Yes, the observatory. Yep. Alright, I am going to say goodnight now. I'm gonna get some sleeps. You get some sleeps or begin your day. Hope you all have a great weekend. And what the hell was that? It's haunted. I will hopefully see you all tomorrow. Good night. I'm glad you liked the story. I will see you again soon.
Initiating goodnight sequence. Dispersing appropriate dosage of compound 347. Initiating phase 1 of memory calibration. This won't hurt a bit. Just close your eyes.